I had spent years working toward this moment, every late night, hunched over my laptop. Every sacrifice I made, every rejection I endured, it had all led to this. And now finally the offer letter sat in my hands, a tangible proof that my dreams were coming true. My heart raced with excitement as I reread the words for the 100th time. The position was everything I had ever wanted a step toward. Independence towards something bigger than the life I had settled for. I practically ran through the front door, eager to share the news with Jason. I had rehearsed this moment in my head so many times. His proud smile, his congratulations, maybe even a celebratory dinner. I imagined him wrapping his arms around me and telling me how proud he was. How he always knew I would achieve something great, but reality was a cruel storyteller. Jason sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, his expression unreadable. I held up the letter beaming. I got the job, I said, expecting excitement, maybe even a hint of admiration. Instead, he barely looked up. What job? I blinked, my excitement faltering. The one I interviewed for last month. The company I told you about, the one Before we begin, imagine watching everything you worked for go up in flames, burned by the very person who was supposed to stand beside you. This is a story of loss, resilience, and the ultimate revenge. If you believe in justice and taking back your power, and in stories that leave you breathless, then hit subscribe. It's free, and together we'll dive into tales that prove no one gets away with betrayal forever. Now let's begin. Jason snatched the paper from my hands before I could finish. His eyes flicked across the page, his face unreadable for a moment. I thought maybe he was just processing the news, but then without a word he stood up, walked over to the kitchen, and held the letter over the stove. My heart stopped. Jason, what are you doing? My voice was shrill, my pulse pounding in my ears. He met my eyes, and a slow smirk curled his lips. I'm the owner of Kutse, this house, and your husband. I'll do whatever I want. You stay home, cook and clean. Then he let the paper fall into the flames. I lunged forward, but it was too late. The edges curled, blackened, and in seconds my dream was nothing but ash. For a long moment I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The sheer shock of what had just happened rooted me in place. My throat tightened, my breath shallow. My voice cracked. You burned it, Jason. Shrugged like it was nothing. You don't need a job. I provide everything for you. Should be grateful. The word twisted in my gut. Like a knife, this wasn't just about a job. This was about control, about power. Jason had never wanted me to succeed. He had wanted me to stay small, to depend on him, to never have the ability to walk away. I stared at him, a man I once thought I loved, and saw him for what he truly was. But I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't scream. Instead, I swallowed the rage that burned in my chest and forced a slow breath. If he thought he could break me, if he thought this was the end of my dreams, he was wrong, very wrong. Jason smirked, as if expecting me to crumble, to fall into his arms and apologize for even daring to want more. I met his gaze, my lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. You're right, I said softly. His eyes flickered with satisfaction. Of course I am now. How about you make us some dinner? I turned toward the kitchen, my fingers trembling, not with fear, but with something far colder, far more dangerous. I would make him dinner. I would smile, I would play the role he expected of me, and then I would burn everything he loved to the ground. He thought he was in control. He had no idea what I was about to do. I moved through the kitchen with mechanical precision, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, and plating food as if I were on autopilot. Jason sat at the dining table, scrolling through his phone without a care in the world. Every now and then he would glance up, satisfied that his world remained undisturbed, that his control over me was absolute. He had no idea that something inside me had shifted, that I was no longer the woman he thought he had married. As I set his plate down in front of him, I studied him in a way I never had before. The man I had once loved, the man I had built my life around, was nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion. Jason hadn't changed overnight. I had simply been too blind to see him for what he truly was. I thought back to the early days when he was charming, affectionate, and endlessly supportive. The way he used to surprise me with little gifts. How he once hung on to every word I said, as if I were the most fascinating person in the world. I remembered how he used to tell me that I was destined for greatness, that I was too brilliant to ever settle for anything less than what I deserved. Somewhere along the way, those words had stopped. First, it was subtle, a casual remark here, a dismissive chuckle there, comments about how I was too emotional when I brought up concerns how I should be, grateful that he worked so hard while I focused on building my career. Then came the real shifts. The discouragement disguised his concern. The way he always found a reason to dismiss my ambitions. Are you sure you want to work in that industry? It's really competitive. Maybe you should focus on home life for now. There's no rush. It's just one job interview. There will be others, but I had fought for this. I had held on to the belief that I could have both love and success. I had been wrong the moment that letter burned. It was as if Jason had taken off a mask he no longer needed. He didn't see me as his partner. He saw me as an extension of himself, as something he could control. As I sat across from him watching him eat, I realized something even more unsettling. Jason genuinely believed he was right. He didn't see what he had done as cruel or manipulative in his mind. He had merely put me back in my place. The thought sent a chill down my spine. I picked at my own food, my appetite non-existent. How was work today? I asked, my voice carefully. Neutral. Jason smirked, chewing lazily. Stressful. But that's what real responsibility feels like. He pointed his fork at me. Not that you'd understand. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. Right? Jason leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. I don't want you worrying about these things anymore. I take care of you, don't I? I nodded slowly, forcing myself to meet his gaze. You do exactly, he smirked. And that's why you don't need to work a job. Wouldn't suit you anyway. You're too soft for that kind of thing. I gripped my fork tighter beneath the table. Soft. I used to think love meant compromise, that marriage meant putting someone else's happiness before my own. But sitting there listening to Jason justify his actions, I finally understood what I had been too afraid to admit. As wasn't love, doesn't diminish, it doesn't shrink, it doesn't burn dreams to ashes. Just to feed its own ego, Jason had spent years shaping me into something small, something manageable, and I had let him not anymore. I lifted my glass and took a slow sip of water, studying him over the rim. You're right, I said, keeping my voice calm. I don't need to work. You take care of everything. Jason smirked, pleased with himself. See, I knew you'd understand. Eventually, I smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt powerful. Jason thought he had won. He thought I had surrendered, but he had no idea that I was already planning my escape. Not just from him, from the entire illusion of a marriage I had once believed in. The days that followed were a blur of carefully measured words and calculated silence. Jason carried on as if nothing had happened, as if burning my offer letter had been nothing more than a trivial decision, a natural extension of his authority. He believed that with enough time, I would forget that the anger in my eyes would fade, and I would settle back into the role he had carved out for me, silent, obedient, grateful. But I was no longer the woman he thought he had married. I had played along, nodding at his words, smiling at his remarks, making dinner just the way he liked. But inside, I was unraveling every illusion, dismantling every piece of the life I had convinced myself was love. I was studying him the way a prisoner studies the lock on their cell door, because I knew I was going to escape. The only question was how Jason controlled everything. Our finances, our home, even the way I spent my time, he had subtly ensured that I never had access to enough money to make independent choices. The joint account was only joint in name. My bank card worked only when he allowed it, and I had no savings of my own. Every time I had earned something, it had somehow found its way into his hands under the guise of responsible financial planning. I hadn't realized what he had been doing until it was too late. But what Jason didn't know was that I wasn't going to sit quietly in his carefully built cage one night as he slept soundly beside me, his breath even and peaceful. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I needed a plan, not just any plan, but one that ensured that when I left, I wouldn't just walk away. I would make sure he felt the loss in every possible way the next morning. I played the part perfectly. I kissed him on the cheek before he left for work. Waved from the door like the devoted wife he believed I was. The moment he was gone, I got to work. I dug through every drawer, every cabinet, every folder Jason had ever kept locked away. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew Jason. He had secrets. He had things he would never want anyone to see. And if I was going to take back control, I needed leverage. Hours passed, and just as I was about to give up, I found a folder tucked away in the back of his office drawer, filled with documents that made my stomach drop. Jason wasn't just controlling, he was deceitful. Hidden bank accounts, unpaid debts, business transactions that looked anything but legal. It was all there neatly organized as if he had never considered that someone might look. I stared at the papers, my hands shaking. Jason had painted himself as the successful provider, the responsible husband who kept our home running smoothly. But in reality, he was drowning in financial problems, and now I had the evidence. I took pictures of everything, emailing them to myself, under a disguised address, ensuring they were backed up in multiple places. Then I carefully put everything back, making sure it looked undisturbed. Step 1 was complete now. I needed to secure my freedom. I reached out to an old friend, someone I had lost touch with because Jason had made sure of it. The moment she picked up, I could feel the weight of my isolation. Mia, her voice was cautious, uncertain. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Hey, Emma. I know it's been a while, but I need your help." There was silence, then a sigh. "Tell me everything," and I did. Emma didn't hesitate. She helped me set up a private account Jason couldn't access. She gave me contacts for legal advice, guiding me through the steps I would need to take to protect myself. Most importantly, she reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. I wasn't alone, but Jason couldn't suspect a thing. Not yet. That evening, as he came home tossing his keys on the counter, I smiled at him like nothing had changed. I let him think he still had control. "You're in a good mood," he noted, narrowing his eyes slightly. I shrugged, setting dinner on the table. "Just happy to be home." He smirked as if my acceptance was inevitable. I sat across from him, listening to him talk about his day, nodding in the right places, laughing at his jokes, and the entire time I was thinking about the folder hidden in his office. The money I had just transferred into my new account, the escape plan, that was slowly falling into place. Jason thought he had won, but he had no idea that the moment he burned my dreams, he had unknowingly set fire to his own life. I was done being trapped, and soon he would know exactly what that meant. I continued the charade with unwavering precision. Every morning, I kissed Jason goodbye, handed him his coffee, and watched him walk out the door with the same smug confidence, believing he had tamed me every evening. I played the devoted wife, setting the table with his favorite meals, nodding along to his self-important monologues about work, and how men like him carried the world on their shoulders. He had no idea that while he was busy basking in his illusion of dominance, I was carefully, methodically unraveling everything he had built. It started small, subtle shifts that he wouldn't notice at first. I went through his files again, memorizing every detail, every transaction, every hidden expense. I found patterns, inconsistencies, and the makings of something bigger than simple financial mismanagement. Jason wasn't just bad with money, he had been covering up serious debts. Ones that, if exposed, could ruin him completely. Then I started rerouting control. I used his arrogance against him, making casual comments about how overwhelming it must be to handle everything alone. I feinted helplessness, asking him to show me. Just in case something ever happened to him, he laughed, taking the bait. Never once suspecting that each piece of information he handed me was another brick in the wall. I was building around him behind the scenes. I was securing my future. I moved money in increments, just enough that he wouldn't notice. I contacted the bank, inquiring about accounts in my name, making sure that when the time came, I could access what I needed with Emma's help. I set up a secondary phone Jason didn't know existed, where I stored backups of every document, every recorded conversation that would ensure my protection. The final piece of the puzzle was his business. Jason prided himself on being untouchable, on keeping everything clean on paper. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized he had made mistakes. Ones that, with the right push, could become his undoing one evening. As we sat on the couch, Jason scrolling. Through his phone, I leaned in and rested my head on his shoulder. He barely acknowledged me, too absorbed in whatever had his attention. "How's work?" I asked casually, keeping my voice light. He exhaled through his nose, scrolling past something before locking his phone, stressful as always. "But that's what men do. We take on the weight of the world, so people like you don't have to." I fought the urge to roll my eyes. "Must be exhausting." "It is," he muttered, rubbing his forehead. "But I handle it." I paused for a moment before tilting my head up, letting my voice soften. I was thinking maybe I could help. Just little things, filing papers, organizing emails. I wouldn't want to overstep. But if it takes some pressure off you? Jason chuckled, shaking his head. "Sweetheart, you wouldn't even know where to start." I smiled, letting the condescension wash over me. "You're probably right." He patted my knee as if I were a child, asking to play with grown-up toys. "You just focus on keeping things at home running smoothly. That's where you're needed." I let out a small knowing laugh. Of course, Jason had no idea that while he dismissed me, I had already forwarded sensitive emails to my private account, had already memorized his most recent transactions, had already taken the first steps to ensure that when I made my move, he wouldn't see it coming, and then fate delivered the perfect opportunity. Jason had been out late for meetings, his usual routine whenever he needed to handle business that night. As I cleaned up after dinner, his phone buzzed on the counter. Normally, he kept it locked away from me, but in his rush that morning, he had forgotten it. I hesitated only for a second before picking it up. A message lit up the screen. "No number. The money still hasn't been transferred. If you don't handle it soon, there will be consequences." My heart pounded. I quickly noted down the number, my mind racing. Jason had never mentioned anything about missing payments, let alone consequences. Who is this person, and what exactly was he involved in? I placed the phone back where I found it, ensuring it looked untouched. Jason never shared details about his business, but this message told me everything I needed to know. He was hiding something much bigger than financial troubles that night. As Jason climbed into bed beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, knowing that I had just stumbled upon something that could accelerate my entire plan. The power balance in our marriage had shifted. Jason just didn't know it yet. I was no longer trapped in his world. He was trapped in mine, lying in the darkness beside Jason. I could hear his steady breathing, the unbothered rhythm of a man who had no idea that the ground beneath him was beginning to crack. The message on his phone echoed in my mind, an urgent riddle waiting to be unraveled. I knew Jason had secrets, financial instability, shady deals. But this was different. Someone out there was waiting for money. Someone who wasn't willing to be patient. The next morning, I played my part. As usual, pouring his coffee, listening to his dismissive remarks, watching him walk out the door like he always did the moment he was gone. I grabbed my spare phone and dialed the number I had copied from his messages. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I braced myself for anything. It rang twice before a voice answered. "You finally ready to handle your business?" The tone was sharp, impatient. I froze for a beat before responding, disguising my voice. "There's been a delay. We need more time." PA, then a low chuckle. "That's not how this works." He knows that I swallowed, steadying myself. "Remind me again what exactly is at stake here." The voice hardened. "He didn't tell you." Another silence. This one stretching with tension, then the voice lowered. "I don't know who you are, but listen carefully. If Jason doesn't pay up soon, he's going to wish he had, and so will you." The call disconnected. My fingers trembled slightly as I lowered the phone. This wasn't just debt. Jason wasn't just struggling with money, he was tangled in something dangerous and worse. Whoever he owed was willing to involve me in the fallout. I wasn't scared. I was furious. Aso had spent years controlling me, making me feel small, dismissing my worth, and now because of his reckless choices, I was being dragged into his mess. I wasn't going to sit back and wait for the storm to hit. I was going to make sure Jason was the only one who suffered the consequences that afternoon. I met Emma at a quiet cafe. She took one look at my face and frowned. "You found something else, didn't you?" I nodded, sliding my phone across the table. She read the number, then the brief notes I had taken from the call. Her expression darkened. This isn't just a late mortgage payment or unpaid credit card debt. This is something serious. I need to know exactly what he owned into, I said, and I need to know how to use it against him. Emma leaned back, crossing her arms. If he's in trouble with the wrong people, confronting him might be dangerous, I shook my head. I'm not going to not confront him. I'm going to make sure they do. The plan formed quickly after that. I used everything I had gathered, Ed emails, transactions, hidden accounts to trace Jason's dealings. He had been borrowing money under false pretenses, moving funds between accounts to cover his tracks, but he had overplayed his hand. The people he owed weren't banks or credit agencies. They were individuals who operated outside the limits of legal consequences, and now they were closing in. I reached out to them again, this time with purpose. I have information on Jason. I told them the kind that can ensure you get what you're owed. There was a pause, then a simple response. We're listening that evening. Jason came home later than usual, irritation lining his features. I could tell something had shifted. He was nervous, distracted. He barely touched his dinner, his mind elsewhere. What's wrong? I asked, feigning concern. Nothing, he muttered, rubbing his temples. Work stuff. Reached across the table, resting my hand over his. You work too hard, I murmured. Maybe you should take a break, clear your mind. Jason sighed, shaking his head. You wouldn't understand, I smiled, hiding the satisfaction bubbling inside me. Oh, but I did the following morning. I made sure to be out of the house before Jason left for work. I had arranged everything perfectly. The people he owed would be waiting for him at his office. They had all the proof they needed to pressure him into a decision. He would either find a way to pay them back immediately or face consequences he couldn't manipulate his way out of. And I had already taken what I needed. By the time Jason realized what was happening, I would be long gone, taking with me everything he had once held over me. My financial independence, my security, my freedom. I wasn't just escaping. I was making sure that Jason had nothing left to hold on to. He had burned my dreams. Now I was setting fire to his entire world. I sat in a quiet cafe, the hum of distant conversations blending into the background as I scrolled through my phone. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. Today was the day everything Jason had built, his power, his control, his carefully curated facade would collapse in on itself, and the best part, he wouldn't even see it coming. I took a slow sip of my coffee, glancing at the time. Jason would have just arrived at his office where an unexpected reception awaited him. The people he had been avoiding, the ones he owed more than just money, were waiting. I had ensured that they had every piece of information they needed. His financial records, the hidden accounts, the fraudulent transactions. They knew exactly how much he had taken, where he had funneled it, and more importantly, how much he had left, which after my careful maneuvering was next to nothing. Jason had always prided himself on being untouchable, on being the one in control. He had spent years making sure. I felt small, ensuring that I was dependent on him, but as I sat there, watching the minutes tick by, I knew that for the first time, he was the one who had no way out. My phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. He knows now. Panic setting in, your move. I exhaled slowly, a satisfied smile curling on my lips. Jason wasn't the type to show weakness, but I could imagine the scene unfolding in his office. His usual arrogance cracking as he realized the walls were closing in, the threats, the demands, the realization that his carefully spun web of control had unraveled completely. And I wasn't finished while Jason was scrambling to fix the disaster at work. I had one last play to make. I left the cafe and headed home. Our home, though it wouldn't be his for much longer by now. He would be too distracted to notice anything else, which gave me just enough time. I had spent the past few weeks preparing slowly but deliberately, removing my presence from his life, important documents, sentimental belongings. Anything that mattered to me, I had already secured elsewhere. The apartment we shared, the one he so proudly claimed as his, was now just a hollow space stripped of anything that tied me to it. I moved through the rooms with precision, taking one last look at the place where I had spent years. Feeling like a prisoner, the kitchen where I had prepared meals, while he took credit for providing the bedroom. Where I had laid awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I had stopped recognizing the man beside me. A past life, when I was finally leaving behind. I left a single envelope on the counter, my final message to Jason. No drawn-out explanations, no desperate, please, just a simple statement. You burned my dreams. Now I've burned your entire world. I'm not coming back. By the time Jason returned home, broken and defeated, I would be long gone. I didn't need to see his face to know what would happen next. The realization that his money was gone, that his power was slipping through his fingers, that the one person he had always thought was stay the one he believed, stay the one he had full control over, had orchestrated his downfall. I imagined him tearing through the house, searching for some kind of leverage, some way to regain control, only to find nothing, no money, no security, no wife waiting for him with dinner and a quiet nod. Just an empty house and an even emptier future for years Jason had dictated. My life decided what I could and couldn't do, stripped away my independence, my confidence, my belief in myself. But in the end, he had never realized the truth. I was never weak. I was never powerless. I was simply waiting for the right moment. And now as I stepped into the cab that would take me far away from everything I had once known, I realized something. Jason had tried to break me, but I had just destroyed him as the cab pulled away from the home. That had felt more like a prison. I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me there, nothing worth holding on to. The weight on my chest, the suffocating grip Jason had once had over my life was gone, and for the first time in years, I could breathe the city. Lights blurred through the window as we sped away, my phone silent in my lap. No messages, no missed calls. Yet Jason hadn't returned home yet. He was still trapped in his own nightmare, scrambling to keep his empire from crumbling, but soon he would step through that front door. You would see the empty space where my things used to be. You would find the letter I had left behind. And then the real fallout would begin. I leaned back against the seat, my heart still pounding despite the relief coursing through me. I had done it. I had walked away. But part of me still craved closure. The final confirmation that Jason understood, that he truly grasped what had happened to him. I didn't have to wait long, less than an hour later. My phone vibrated violently against my palm. Jason's name flashed across the screen, his calls coming in. Rapid succession, I ignored them, watching as the number climbed 56-7. Missed calls in the span of a few minutes, then the messages started. Where are you? You think you can just walk away, come home. No, this isn't funny, Mia. I let out a quiet breath, my fingers hovering over the screen. It was almost amusing watching him spiral. Jason had spent years making me feel powerless, convincing me that I had no way out. But now he was the one losing control. And he wasn't handling it well. The messages became more frantic, the threats slipping through between desperate pleas. You wanted answers, you wanted to know how I had done it, how I had outmaneuvered him, but most of all, he wanted to believe this wasn't real. I turned off my phone. The next few days were eerily quiet. I had expected Jason to show up at my doorstep to try and pull me back into his world. But he didn't instead. The fallout was happening elsewhere. Emma called me late that evening, her voice laced with barely contained excitement. You need to check the news, she said. I frowned, grabbing the remote and flipping through channels until I found it there. Plastered across the screen was Jason's face, not in the polished, confident way he usually presented himself, but in the form of a headline that sent a thrill through my chest. Local businessmen under investigation for financial fraud. I sat up straighter, my pulse quickening. The story unfolded before my eyes. Investigators had discovered irregularities in Jason's business dealings. Money that had been funneled through illegal channels, debts that couldn't be accounted for. The very people I had tipped off had ensured that Jason wouldn't just be facing personal ruin. He was facing legal consequences. I watched as reporters detailed his downfall, Piecing together the same information I had uncovered weeks ago, Jason's empire had been built on deception, and now it was crumbling in front of everyone. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Jason, it was an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. A familiar voice greeted me on the other end, the same voice from the call I had made when I set everything into motion. "You did well," the man said simply. I swallowed. "He deserves worse," a low chuckle. "Don't worry, he's going to get exactly what he deserves." The call ended, and I sat there at the weight of everything sinking in. It was over, truly. Over. Jason had lost everything, his money, his power, his reputation, and I was free. I stepped onto the balcony of my new apartment, feeling the crisp night air against my skin. The city stretched out before me, vast and full of possibilities. I had spent years believing I needed Jason, that without him, I was nothing but standing there, looking at the world ahead of me. I realized the truth. Jason had never been my future. He was just a lesson I had finally learned. Standing on the balcony of my new apartment, I inhaled the crisp night air. Feeling lighter than I had in years, Jason was finally paying the price for everything he had done. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't the one left picking up the pieces. His carefully built world was crumbling, and I was one who had struck the match. But even as I stood there relishing my freedom, I knew one thing for certain: Jason wouldn't go down quietly. I turned my phone back on, after days of silence, expecting to see the wreckage of his rage laid out in missed calls and messages. And I wasn't disappointed. There were dozens. Some were angry, full of blame and demands. Others were desperate, pleading for me to come back to fix the mess he had made. But the last one made me pause. Meet me one last time. "You owe me that much." I owed him nothing, but I also knew Jason well enough to recognize what this was. He wasn't looking for closure. He was looking for control, and I was about to show him one last time that he had none. I chose the meeting place carefully, a public cafe one, where I would never feel cornered. I arrived early, positioning myself at a table near the window, my back against the wall so I could see him coming when he finally walked in. I barely recognized him. The confident self-assured man I had once married was gone in his place. Was someone unsteady, his face tense, his clothes slightly disheveled. The consequences of his downfall were written all over him. He spotted me instantly and stalked over, dropping into the chair across from me for a long moment. He just stared as if trying to figure out how I had managed to slip through his grasp. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "You set me up." I stirred my coffee slowly. Letting the silence stretch between us, I set myself free. His jaw clenched. "You think you won." I met his gaze, unflinching. "I know I did." Jason let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You destroyed my life." I arched a brow. "You burned my offer letter, told me I belong in the kitchen, took everything from me, and expected me to thank you for it. Tell me, Jason, why do you get to ruin my dreams?" But I'm not allowed to take back my own life for the first time. He didn't have an answer. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "You have no idea what you've done these people. They don't just go away." I tilted my head, pretending to consider his words. "You're right. That's why I made sure they had everything they needed to take their problem directly to you." His fingers curled into fists on the table, his composure slipping. "You don't understand what's at stake." I set my cup down with a quiet clink. "Jason, you don't understand. I was never your pawn. You thought you had me trapped, but I was always 10 steps ahead. No, you're the one with nothing left." For the first time, real fear flashed in his eyes. Not fear for me, but fear of what came next for him. He opened his mouth, but I stood before he could speak. "This is the last time we will ever speak," I said, my voice calm. "Certain you don't own me anymore, and you never will again." I walked out of that cafe without looking back. Jason was my past, and I had a future to claim. As I stepped out of the cafe, the cold air hit my face sharp and refreshing. I had done it. I had faced Jason one last time and walked away on my terms. The weight of years of manipulation and control had lifted, and in its place was something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. But I knew Jason. He wasn't the type to let go easily. He would fight Claw and try to regain the control he had lost. But the beauty of his downfall was that it was already in motion far beyond anything he could salvage. I took a deep breath and hailed a cab back to my apartment. My hands steady, my mind clear. Emma was waiting for me when I arrived. Her expression a mix of relief and excitement, so she asked, leaning forward on the couch. "How did he take it?" I smirked, sinking into the chair across from her. Exactly how we expected denial. Bigger and then fear. She let out a low whistle. That's got to be a first for him. "It is," I said, leaning back, "and it won't be the last." I grabbed the remote and turned on the news, knowing what I was looking for. The story was already spreading like wildfire. Jason's financial scandal had become public knowledge, and the headlines were, "Relentless businessman's fraud. Exposed authorities investigating missed funds. Former employees speak out against Jason Matthews. Corrupt dealings, could he face jail time?" I watched with quiet satisfaction as the reporters detailed every one of Jason's mistakes. His company was in shambles. His reputation, once so carefully protected, was now being torn apart, and his allies. They were vanishing immigrant. "I still can't believe you pulled this off." I met her gaze. He underestimated me. That was his first mistake. As the news continued to unfold, my phone vibrated, another unknown number. I didn't have to guess who it was. The people Jason owed weren't patient, and now that his financial misdeeds were in the open, their window for getting what they wanted was closing fast. I answered, keeping my voice steady. "Yes." A deep voice responded, calm but firm. "HEK, losing everything fast. We'll be collecting soon." I nodded, even though they couldn't see me. I figured as much. "Oh." Then the voice softened, almost amused. "You're colder than I expected." I exhaled. "Slowly I've learned from the best." The call ended and I set the phone down. My heart steadied. Jason had spent years ensuring I had no power, no controls now. He was at the mercy of forces he couldn't manipulate. Emma raised an eyebrow. "That them?" "Yeah," she leaned back, shaking her head in disbelief. "Jason's really done for, isn't he?" I smiled. Oh, Hyun's only just beginning to realize it, and I was right. The next morning, the inevitable happened. Jason showed up at my apartment. I had expected it. I had even prepared for it. When the knock came, I didn't flinch. I simply stood across the room and opened the door. Jason stood there looking nothing like the man I had once known. His eyes were wild, his clothes slightly wrinkled, his entire posture screaming desperation. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You look awful." He didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he stepped forward, his voice low, urgent. "Mia, we need to talk." I tilted my head about how you finally lost everything, how karma came knocking, and you have nowhere to run. His jaw tightened. "You think this is funny?" I shrugged. "I think it's overdue." Jason let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. "I don't have time for this." His voice wavered slightly, the cracks beginning to show. "You don't understand what's happening." "Oh, I understand perfectly." I held his gaze, unwavering. "I understand that you did this to yourself. I understand that you thought you could control everything and everyone, but you were wrong." He took another step closer. "I just need time to fix this to get things back on track," laughed. Not because it was funny, but because Jason truly believed there was a way out, that if he just tried hard enough, he could pull the strings and make it all disappear. But this time, there was no escape, Jason. I said, my voice quiet, but firm. "There's nothing left to fix." He stared at me, realization dawning for the first time. He truly saw it. The finality in my eyes. The certainty in my stance. There was no going back. Not for me, not for him. His shoulders sagged slightly. "You really don't care, do you?" I met his gaze, my voice steady. "Not anymore," Jason swallowed, looking away for a moment. When he turned back, his expression had changed. The desperation was still there, but now there was something else. Resignation. "Then I guess this is it," he said quietly. I nodded. "It is." He hesitated as if wanting to say something else, but then without another word, he turned and walked away. I watched him go, waiting until he disappeared down the street before closing the door behind me. Emma peeked out from the kitchen, her arms crossed. That was intense. I let out a breath, finally allowing myself to feel the weight of the moment. Yeah. She studied me for a moment before smiling. So what now? I smiled back, feeling something new stir inside me. Now, I said. I start over, and this time, I was doing it on my own terms. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely alone. But it wasn't the kind of loneliness that came from isolation. It was freedom, a clean slate. The life I had been denied for so long was now mine to claim. No more second guessing, no more waiting for permission, no more living in someone else's shadow. I took a deep breath, letting the silence settle around me like a warm embrace. Jason was gone, and with him, the chains that had bound me to a life that was never meant to be mine. The city hummed outside my window, a reminder that the world was still moving, still full of opportunities waiting to be seized, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to reach for them. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through my curtains, a stark contrast to the dim, suffocating space I had left behind. No heavy footsteps echoing down the hall. No cold voice demanding answers, just peace. I stretched, savoring the feeling of waking up without the weight of someone else's expectations pressing down on me. Emma had already left for work, leaving a note on the kitchen counter. "You did it now, go live?" I smiled to myself, pouring a cup of coffee as I scrolled through my emails among the usual clutter. One subject line stood out: job offer, reopening discussion. My breath caught in my throat. It was from the same company that had once given me an opportunity before. Jason had burned it to ashes. I opened the email, my fingers trembling slightly. "Dear Mia, we understand that circumstances prevented you from joining us previously, but given your impressive qualifications, we'd love to reconsider you for the position if you're still interested. Let's set up a meeting." I set the phone down, my heart pounding. The universe had just handed me the very thing Jason had tried to steal from me. And this time, no one was standing in my way without hesitation. I typed my response. "I'd love to meet. When are you available?" The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. I updated my resume, gathered my portfolio, and stood in front of the mirror, practicing the confidence I now felt deep in my bones. I wasn't just proving something to them, I was proving it to myself that I was capable, that I was enough, that I had never needed Jason or anyone else to define my worth. The next morning, I stepped into the office building, my chin held high, the interview went smoothly, and as I walked out of the meeting room, I already knew I had it. I had taken back what was mine. Days turned into weeks, and soon my life no longer felt like something I had to escape from. It was something I was building. One choice at a time, my job, my apartment, my future, every piece was mine, untainted by anyone else's control. One afternoon, as I sat at a cafe flipping through a book, my phone buzzed with a news alert. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. Breaking out then. Matthews declares bankruptcy amid fraud investigation. I stared at the screen, rereading the words, letting them sink in. Jason, the man who had once believed himself untouchable, was now publicly unraveling. His assets were being seized. His associates had abandoned him, and the world was finally seeing him for what he truly was. I expected to feel triumphant, victorious. But instead, I felt nothing. Jason no longer had a place in my life, not even as a memory of my revenge. He was just another part of my past. A lesson learned, a chapter closed. I locked my phone, took a sip of my coffee, and smiled. Because I had won. Not because he had lost, but because I had finally chosen myself.